Welcome to the second episode of Grammar Cookies. Today we are going to take a look at the flag cell. Thanks to everyone who subscribed after the announcement and the last two videos. I hope you liked the first one and also the general concept. If you have any ideas or feedback on the individual episodes or in general on the series, feel free to comment the video below. You can always find the examples that I use in the videos also linked below in the video description. So let's get to the computer and head right into the flag cell episode.
Flag cells. Flag cells are useful when you want to represent Boolean properties of your concept as keywords in the editor. In our example here, we have a concept that has three properties: public, writable, and checked. Let's see how the editor behaves for this. So first thing, we can type var and get a variable, as expected. But we can also type public, for instance, and get a public variable. And we can also combine these things. So we can make a public variable, for instance, writable, like this. And all these keywords also show up in code completion here. So when we go to our variable, we see checked, public, and writable as the individual keywords that show up. And it also works for an empty line. So when we go to an empty line, we also see all these three keywords show up in addition to the actual variable. And if we select public here, we get a public variable. And of course, the same also applies for checked here. Now, how was this achieved? Let's take a look at the editor definition. What we see here is three flag cells inside the editor definition of our variable. And that's all we need. Everything else was automatically generated by grammar cells for you. All the site transformation, all the substitute menu entries, all that was required to get this behavior. Now let's say we want to customize what is how grammar cells behaves. In this case, I would like to invert the check cell, the checked property. So when the property is not set, I want to show unchecked. How can we do this? We go into the editor definition, of course, and then in the inspector, we scroll down to the very bottom, and what we see here is the flag cell configuration. And there is a property here, inverted, which we can just set to true. And then we also have the text property up here, which by default shows the property name, but we can customize this. So let's say we want to have it show up as unchecked. And also the keyword that you use to type is unchecked for this. So rebuild, go back to the editor. And first thing you will notice that the last variable that I defined here with the checked flag no shows nothing, and the others that didn't have it show unchecked. So it now behaves exactly as expected, so it's inverted. So you can remove the unchecked flag and add it again just as you would do before. But there's also more you can customize. So one thing you notice here is there's an error in the model which tells us that public properties cannot be writable. But right now, the user can go to a public variable and just make it writable. So let's say I want to prevent this from happening. We can also do that. So in this case, we go to the writable flag and go to the inspector. And there is something called site transformation condition here, which allows us to set a condition when the user can type the writable keyword on an existing variable definition. And what we want to do here is basically only when the node is not public, we want to allow to type this. Let's rebuild, go back. And now on the public here, you see the only thing that shows up is unchecked. If we remove public again, you can see writable also shows up. By that way, we can manipulate what is actually showing up there. Okay, then next thing you might ask, I have a property here on my module, which allows me to set it to internal. And in internal modules, I don't want public variables to show up. So on an empty line here, you see there's no public flag available. So how was this achieved? This is done with the substitute condition. So here you see there's a substitute condition that checks if the module is internal, and only if it's not internal, you can start typing the public flag from an empty line. So here you see it doesn't show up. If I set internal to false, then it shows up. Okay, then last thing in the editor definition of a flag cell, you might ask, what is this very bottom thing for? This do not generate substitute action. So substitute conditions, as we've seen before, is the thing that you use for the empty line case. So if we set this to true, what happens is that you can never type that flag on an empty line, but you can set it afterwards. An example here is I have a very simple thing called method, and it has a synchronized flag, and the do not generate substitute action is set to true. So let's see how the editor behaves. What we see here in code completion is that only method shows up. Synchronized doesn't show up. So I can select the method, but after I have created the method, I can go here and I can set the synchronized flag. So if this is set to true, then you basically cannot start typing with it, but afterwards, the whole site transformation story of setting the property on something that exists, that still is generated for you automatically. I hope you found this useful. Next week, we are going to take a look at the optional cell. So make sure you get subscribed to the channel if you like to get notified for the updates. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye.